Hello everyone, how's it going? This is the Bald Metal Nerd coming at you with another wonderful video. Obviously, you've read the title, and I want to give a special thank you to Mike P. He threw this idea down in the comment section of one of my videos a long time ago. He basically uh, said, hey, can you do a history of your, music players or basically history of your music formats and the players you've owned, some of the ones that you can remember. So I was like, yeah, that would be, I think, a neat video. So this is obviously going to be a slightly extended trip down memory lane, but I'll try to make it interesting and not dawdle too long on each aspect. So I will give approximate timeline for each of this stuff, where I was in my life, all that stuff. So let's go ahead and kind of dive right into this. My first format that I collected on my own was cassette, right? Obviously. We all know what cassettes are. So there you go. And the very first cassette player I ever owned that I had to play my own music on in my room was, I actually managed to find the exact model. It was one of these. It was, let's see if we can get a good picture zoomed in on the screen so you can get a really good look at it. Oh, basically it looked like that. Apparently it was a Sony Soundwriter CFS-W301. I guess there weren't a ton of these models since I was, obviously I don't remember the model number from when I was a kid. I just looked at Sony Soundwriters and found this one and recognized it. I got this in 1989. It was the first stereo I ever owned for myself. My parents bought it for me for my birthday and got me, I've told this story a bunch of times, but I'll just repeat it real quick. I got Skid Row's self-titled debut with the thing, and Poison's Open Up and Say Aw, and I liked the Skid Row much better than I did Poison. And then a couple of months after that, I got Metallica's Master of Puppets because I saw it in a flea market. Boom, instant metalhead. Haven't looked back since. So it all started on this boombox. This is the first. I mean, it's funny to think that this piece of equipment is the first time I ever heard Master of Puppets was playing out of one of these. So just keep that in mind. This is what I had to listen to at the time. And when I was a kid, I thought it was absolutely tremendously great. I absolutely loved this unit. To be honest, I don't know what happened to this unit. I have no idea where it went, what happened to it, but this was it. It was this glorious thing was my very first thing I ever listened to my own music on. And it's funny because even back then, I listened to the radio some, but I certainly liked listening to, my tapes better than the radio, even back at this early stage. We'll continue to see this trend as I continue to talk about music formats. But yeah, so there you go. That was the first one. The second player I ever owned was it was actually one of these models here. I had one of these not long after I started collecting tapes and all that. I, of course, had to get a cassette Walkman, something that would play cassettes, so I got one of these. I don't know what year I got this thing. It may not have been this exact model, but I do remember owning... I actually had several cassette Walkmans when I was younger. I had a few Sony models and a bunch of some generic models that weren't Sony that obviously played cassettes. But to be honest, I don't remember many of them. I know I had this one, and I had a variant. Let's see if I can find it. That only played cassettes. Didn't have... I can't find it. Whatever. Anyway, it was this body, but it had a slightly different label on it, and it looked very similar to this, but it only played cassettes. I remember that. I didn't have a built-in radio at all on it, and it was only cassettes. And again, the same thing with this Walkman. I listened to the radio some, but I definitely listened to cassettes on it a lot. And I actually used cassette Walkmans for a really long time. Hell, I think I probably used those up until really I was a young adult. I definitely used them a lot in high school, even though I had the. I'm going to show off something else, but I definitely used cassette Walkmans for a really long time. I know at least through high school I used those, and maybe even a bit into the early part of college. So I definitely, I like I said, I originally got them in middle school, and I used cassette Walkmans for quite a while. So there you go. That was kind of the second player I had. Moving on. We take a jump forward, or a leap forward, I guess, and I moved on to cassettes. When I got one of these, was no longer my primary format. My primary format shifted to, you guessed it, CDs. I got one of these units, I'm not sure the exact year, 92 or 93 maybe, is when I got this unit. Now, I didn't get this exact unit. I got the variant of this, basically, that has dual cassette decks on it. But other than that, it was pretty much identical to this, just slightly different. 2 cassette decks, but I remember definitely having I have one of these units now that I got at a flea market, and I made a video about it a while back, but yeah, this is pretty much, this was the first thing that was mine that I listened to CDs on. Now, to be fair, this unit is not the first thing I ever heard CDs on, period. My parents had a proper hi-fi with a CD player in it. So I heard CDs before I got this, but this was the first one that was mine. And when I got this, I dove headfirst into collecting CDs. And to this day, CDs are obviously my dominant physical format. I do listen to cassettes to some still, but I definitely listen to CDs a lot more. So there's that. So moving on from that, I got a Discman similar to this. I'm not sure exactly what year I got the Discman. I know it was 90-something, and I know I had 2 Discmans. I got one of these probably not long after I got that boombox, maybe a year or 2. And I had it for a while, and it got screwed up somehow. And I remember I enjoyed having the Discman because it was nice to have a nice... But I didn't take it out of the house that much because, honestly, for portable use, cassettes were still better than CDs by a pretty wide margin. CD Walkmans were never as good as the cassette ones. I'm sorry, Discmans, whatever. I just call them CD Walkmans. They were never as good as the cassette Walkmans because, well, CDs as a walking around format are pretty lousy because they're spinning discs. And eventually I did get one. I had this model too that had the built-in skip protection, but even with that, it was still kind of a lousy experience compared to cassette Walkmans. I always preferred cassette Walkmans over these. I used these a good amount, but I definitely used cassette Walkmans a lot more than I used the CD Walkmans. So, now, late in high school, it was either late in high school or early in college. I'm not sure which. Actually, no, I was in college when I got this because I remember my girlfriend that I had at the time commenting on this thing that I got. So I actually got this when I was in college. I got a quote. I upgraded from that Sony basically boombox I had that had a CD player into a quote mini system. So I probably would have gotten this in. This is actually this is from my video I actually uploaded to this channel a while back about this very unit. So I guess I would have gotten this in 1998 or so. It was, of course, a mini system, which were pretty big at the time. And I absolutely remember going to Best Buy and taking Megadeth's So Far So Good So What CD with me and plopping it into the different mini systems that were in my price range at Best Buy. And I chose this one, this Iowa unit, because I thought it had really great sound quality, and it does. In fact, I recently made a video about this, but I broke the centerpiece because I dropped it and it got all screwed up. It's my fault. But I actually still have the main left and right speakers in my living room upstairs, actually. That's how good those speakers are. I mean, for what they are shockingly good speakers. And I still use them even now. So, yeah, the centerpiece is gone, but I still got the speakers, and they still work great, and they sound great. So, there you go. That was basically what I would consider my first proper, I guess it'd be my first proper high fidelity, kind of player. I mean, it was the first one where the sound went from merely being adequate and somewhat good to getting on to a level that somewhat approached high fidelity. Now, it wasn't totally there. I'm not going to say this is the best sounding system. Obviously, my stereo I have now blows this thing out of the water completely. But it was kind of the first step on, going on the true path to hi-fi. So there you go. That was circa 1998. And a couple years after that, obviously, the MP3 craze hit, and I started burning a lot of, CDs from MP3s that I either ripped from my own collection and or downloaded from the internet. And I listened to MP3 a good amount. And I did have this was the first MP3 player I ever owned. Portable MP3 player, and I listened to it a decent amount. Honestly, at this point, I'm not sure if I still had a cassette. This probably, oh, by the way, the year of this, I probably got this in, like, I don't know, we'll say probably 2001 or so, maybe 02 at the latest, so still definitely a little while ago. And I'm just trying to think, did I'm not really sure, like I said, how much I still listen to my cassette or CD Walkman. Probably not nearly as much by this point. I'm not even sure if I still had them at this point. So there you go. But I definitely used that somewhat. And now it didn't have nearly as long of a run in my life as other things that I have. Shortly after I got that, I got this right here, which is an RCA Pearl MP3 player, and it has a 1 gig capacity, so you can actually store, if you're just doing nothing but MP3s, a gig, you can store a decent amount of songs on a gig. And it has a screen, unlike that device. So between those two portable players, I use them a decent amount, but not nearly as much as the cassette or CD Walkman. I think because by this time, I was a young adult, out of college. I owned my own home. I was married to my ex-wife, so I didn't use portable players nearly as much as I did when I was a much younger person. Because as you get older, your lifestyle changes, and depending on what you're doing, you may not listen to portable music players as much as you get older. So that was just a thing that happened. Then, of course, when I got my first house, I got my first real proper hi-fi. I got my 5-disc JVC CD changer, which I still have now. It's still my primary CD player even now. I got all this in 2001. I got a JVC receiver, which is upstairs. on my TV up there. I still have it. It was basically a home theater in a box, so it came with like 5 really small satellite speakers. And it didn't take me too long to start replacing those speakers with better speakers, and I'm still using the better speakers in my stereo now. I'm using the JBL Northridge speakers that I have. Those are still my primary speakers. I got a really nice Pioneer center channel that unfortunately is in a box because I don't have a home theater currently set up. I don't have a 5.1 setup, but basically, roughly around the 2001 era, I started amassing, true hi-fi components to get just a really good sound setup, and that's when I began down that road. And I probably listen to MP3s more than I listen to any other music format still. Just because, well, it's the most convenient. I do listen to CDs a fair amount, and in the next format I'll show off here in a moment. I listen to that as well, but I definitely listen to MP3s more than anything else. And then around, we'll say, I got my first, now this item existed way before 2012, but I jumped on board the smartphone train in 2012. That's when I got my first smartphone. It's not this one, obviously. It was a different one. It was an HTC One V, but who cares? It was just a smartphone. Smartphones are smartphones, right? They all are, black. They're all a large screen, touch, yada yada. The form factor has not changed really much since, obviously Apple introduced the iPhone, and the form factor has been that pretty much ever since. And of course, what I did at that point is I started, I got an SD card and loaded lots and lots of MP3s onto it. And of course, that's now what I use as my portable player. I use it in my car, the whole 9 yards. I don't listen to. And 2012 is probably when I really decreased, burning CDRs, right? I did a lot prior to 2012 because, well, obviously I had to get something to listen to in my car, right? So, yeah, I had a lot of CDRs back then, but nowadays honestly can't remember the last time I burned an audio CD. It has been a pretty long time since I've burned one. So there you go. That's so basically that brings us to basically my most recent format, and that of course is vinyl. But bonus, it was probably actually my first format as well, because when I was 5 years old, I know I've mentioned this dozens of times, but I did have this album on vinyl, right? It was the only record I had as a kid. I didn't have a bunch of records. That was it. Thriller was it. And I just wasn't interested in music generally for, till I was about 11. And that's when I really started diving into it. By the time I was 11, obviously, I already told you, started with cassettes and then moved through all that stuff to the current age. And as far as how often, and of course, the record player I have is the ATLP 120 that everybody knows and either loves and hates, whatever, but it's what I have. So, yeah, and that pretty much brings us to the present day. So, present day, obviously, I listen to MP3 the most, both at home and away from home. You could say I listen, as far as streaming music go, I very seldom listen to it unless we're talking about YouTube. If YouTube counts, then yeah, I listen to a decent amount of streaming music. But if we don't count YouTube, then I listen to very little streaming music. MP3 by far is the most, then followed up by CD, then followed by vinyl, then followed by cassette. So there you go. That is my complete history of, music formats and players. I hope you found this interesting. Let me know in the comments below if any of this stuff was familiar to you, if you had a different journey, whatever. That's pretty much it. If you made it all the way through this, I appreciate it very much. As always, if you like this, thumbs up. If you don't, what? Share, subscribe, all the wonderful things. Thanks so much for watching. Live long and prosper.